All right, good morning, everyone. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tulsa Mishpacha B'Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shir midrashos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Haba Aleinu Latova, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, and thanks to Hashem for all of His nisim, both the revealed and the hidden. For Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and in the merit of the speedy arrival of Mashiach. Daniel and Batsheva Pava of Eretz Yisrael, in commemoration of the second yahrzeit of Batsheva's father, Reb Shlomo Yehuda Aryeh Vea, Philadelphia, which is on the 7th of Tammuz. He was a child survivor of Auschwitz and left over 100 descendants. Incredible. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the schos of our precious hostages. May Baruch Hu, Meretz Hashem, bring them home b'shalom and b'karov. In the merit of our holy soldiers, may Hashem give them Hatzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yedehem, and in the merit of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, may Baruch Hu continue to shower upon them bracha, shmira, yisera, hashgacha pratis, and for all of Klal Yisrael, may bizochem Meretz Hashem to besoros tovos, Yeshuas and Nechamas, shalom, and halavai geula m'hira b'yameinu. With that, let us begin. I want to begin first of all by apologizing for the multiple messages this morning. It was one of those mornings where at 5 o'clock it looked like the share was not going to happen. Then by 8:30. It did happen, so I'm sorry for the back and forth, but it is a great schos Baruch Hashem to continue a little bit along our journey. There are sheets, if anyone needs, there are sheets on the table, on the bima, up front. I feel like this is like a Southwest flight, over here, anywhere you want to go. Okay, so let's begin. So we're going to focus a little bit this morning on Parshas Chukas. And Parshas Chukas contains what is perhaps one of, I feel like every week when I speak about the parsha, it's always, the parsha contains one of the most dramatic and traumatic stories, because the truth is, our most dramatic stories in the Chumash are often the most traumatic ones as well. So if you take a look at number 1, so just to give a little bit of context. So remember again, we're coming off a string of, for lack of a better term, like somewhat stinging defeats for Klal Yisrael. Parshas Shlach had the Meraglim, the sin of the spies. Last week, Parshas Korach, the tremendous obeying of Korach. This week, Parshas Chukas. Now remember again, Parshas Chukas starts out in a good way. Para Aduma, many beautiful mitzvos. But then towards the end of the parsha, we come to a very dramatic episode. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'edam midbartzin b'chodesh harishon, vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh, v'tamas sham Miriam v'tikaber sham. So in source number 1, Torah gives us context. Klal Yisrael is coming to Midbartzin, another segment of the desert, and Miriam dies. As a result, or we'll see, and Torah goes on, the people didn't have anything to drink, and therefore again they rebelled against Moshe and Aaron. Ultimately, what's the connection between the death of Miriam and nothing to drink? Because remember again, the Gemara says that in the schos of the 3 siblings, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, Klal Yisrael received 3 things. In the schos of Moshe Rabbeinu, the man; in the schos of Aaron HaKohen, the cloud; and in the schos of Miriam, the well. So Miriam dies, and suddenly again the well is gone. So what happens? Klal Yisrael complains. And this in general, by the way, is unfortunately, we've spoken a lot about this over the last 2 weeks, that the good thing about the Jewish people is that we're pretty predictable. At least from the Chumash's perspective, we're pretty predictable. When crisis hits, what usually occurs? What occurs? Right? So we daven. That would be a great answer if it was true, right? That's the ideal. Good. It's always good to start with optimism. We daven. What do we actually do? We fall apart, right? When we face crisis, we absolutely fall apart, which by the way, is not a condemnation of the Jewish people. It's the nature of the human condition. Most people, when they face crisis, tend to fall apart. Then hopefully somewhere down the road we go ahead and we gather ourselves back together. But every single time Klal Yisrael faces crisis, they fall apart. The difference just is, and the tragedy is, that when Klal Yisrael falls apart, people fall apart in all different kinds of ways. Some people fall apart and they're crying and they're upset and they're depressed. Other people fall apart and they lash out. Klal Yisrael, we lash out. Not now, but again, historically, every single time we fall apart, ultimately they turn. Whether they turn on Moshe, they turn on Aaron, they turn on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So once again, Miriam dies, there's no well, there's no water, and obviously that is cause for panic. Let's not underestimate that at all. But they turn against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. Vayarav ha'em Moshe vayomru leimar v'lu gavanu b'gva achinu lifnei Hashem. And they say like the most outrageous thing. They say, you know what? If only we had died with Korach and his followers. If only we had died with, the spies. If only we had died with everyone else who died in the desert, which of course is such an outrageous thing to say. But again, when people are in pain and people feel helpless and people feel hopeless and people feel just overwhelmed, they say things that don't make any sense. So literally again, they say to Moshe Rabbeinu, if only we had died together with everyone else. Why did you bring us to the desert to die here, together us, our flocks? And again, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Why did you take us out? Why did you bring us here? Why did you make us leave Egypt? And it's interesting how they describe Egypt. The desert, it's arid, there's nothing. And every single time Klal Yisrael remembers Egypt, right? How do they remember Egypt? Right? It's beautiful. It's right. You would think that Egypt was like the Riviera. It's incredible how they talk about Egypt. It's interesting in general. People do a lot of historical revisionism. It's just when people talk about what Europe was like before the war, right? So you have this image of piety and perfection. Everything was wonderful. It was terrible, right? It was miserable, right? There was pogroms. There was anti-Semitism. Yeah, you had a lot of beautiful things there, but we tend to go ahead and engage in historical revisionism. So Klal Yisrael did this with Egypt. It's fascinating. Remember again, this is the same generation who left, right? Same people who left Egypt. They saw what happened over 210 years. But again, you have to understand, so much of this is just the panic, and so much of this is just the unknown and fear speaking. In any event, they go ahead and they gang up on Moshe Rabbeinu. Number 2, Vayidar Hashem Moshe Rabbeinu, where Hashem says to Moshe, Kaches hamata v'hakel asa'ida ata v'aron achicha v'dibartem el asela le'emehem v'nasan meimav v'otseisa lehem mayim min asela v'shkisa asa'ida v'es be'ira. Okay, Hakadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, here's the plan. Take your staff, gather the people, speak to the rock, and you'll bring forth water from the rock. A highly scripted plan. 3 steps. Gather the people. Number 1, take your staff. Number 2, gather the people. Number 3, speak to the rock. Number 4, it'll bring forth water. A perfectly scripted plan. Rabbi Soloveitchik points out something very beautiful. There are different types of leaders in Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu had a very scripted leadership. The Ribono Shel Olam told him what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. All you need to do is stick to the script. Source number 3. Moshe takes the staff. Listen, you rebellious ones. We're going to bring water forth from the rock. Moshe lifted the staff. He hit the rock twice. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu takes his staff, goes in, gathers the people, so he complies again. Point 1, gather, take your staff, complied. Point 2, go ahead, gather the people, complied. But then, of course, the point of departure, he strikes the rock. He doesn't strike the rock once, he strikes the rock twice, and water begins to gush forth. So good news, Klal Yisrael has water, right? Good news, crisis averted. Tragedy, number 4, Vayomer Shema Moshe v'Aaron, Ya'an lo ha'emantem bi, laktishini le'enei b'nei Yisrael. The Ribono Shel Olam says, Moshe, you disobeyed. You had an opportunity to sanctify my name in front of Klal Yisrael. You did not do so. Lachein lo saviu es hakal hazeh el ha'aretz asher nasati lohem. Therefore, Moshe, you will not bring Am Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. And the Torah ends off, the section ends off, Heima me meriva, asher ravu b'nei Yisrael es Hashem vaykadesh bam. So a traumatic episode for Klal Yisrael, a traumatic episode for Moshe Rabbeinu. Because remember again, if there was one thing that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted more than anything, it was to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And by the way, why did Moshe Rabbeinu want to enter into Eretz Yisrael? Why? So you have to understand something. Moshe Rabbeinu understood that his job was to get the people from point A to point B. That was his job. Right? He understood he was not going to be the leader who would lead the conquest. That was not his thing. That requires a different type of leadership. Number 1, it requires someone younger, right? And it requires a warrior. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't the warrior leader. Moshe Rabbeinu was the inspirational leader. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one whose job it was to take the people out of Egypt, try to take Egypt out of the people and get them to Eretz Yisrael. I think that for Moshe Rabbeinu, what Eretz Yisrael potentially represented was his opportunity at a normal life. Moshe Rabbeinu had a profoundly abnormal life. Not abnormal in the holiest of holy, but abnormal. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't live with his wife. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't effectively raise his children. Moshe Rabbeinu was fully given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Klal Yisrael. What Eretz Yisrael represented for Moshe Rabbeinu was an opportunity at normalcy. I don't know that Moshe Rabbeinu could ever be a regular person, so to speak, but he's not going to be the leader. He knew that he was going to hand over the reins to Yehoshua. And now in this very moment, Moshe Rabbeinu commits a dramatic mistake, although it's not immediately clear what it was. We'll talk about this in just a moment. And all of that evaporates. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, in this one moment, you did not comply, literally translated, you did not sanctify me, and therefore, you will not lead the people into Eretz Yisrael, which means, Moshe, you're not going in. You're not going into Eretz Yisrael. And that's where the story ends. What's fascinating is, again, I didn't give you the rest of the Chumash over here. What's fascinating to note is what's missing from this story. I know it's an unfair question. But if you saw that Chumash, what's missing from this story? Generally, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says something harsh to Moshe Rabbeinu, what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He usually pushes back. By the Meraglim he did this, by the Chet Egel. Here, fascinatingly enough, what happens is God gives down this tremendous decree, and everybody moves on. There's no dialogue, there's no back and forth, there's no give and take, there's a Kabbalah. Moshe Rabbeinu accepts what HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's amazing. For Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu will not stop until God concedes. But for himself, Moshe Rabbeinu was not arguing. He is a mekabel. He accepts what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, and that was it. The question we have to try to analyze here a little bit is what's going on over here, right? What is this story? In other words, what was the if I were to ask you? So, what was the chait of Moshe Rabbeinu? What was his sin? He hit the rock, right? Again, so if I were to ask you, does the punishment fit the crime? What would you say? It's hard to answer that question, right? Why? Because from our perspective, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. But obviously, the greater the person, the greater the standard that they are held to. So a Moshe Rabbeinu, right? A Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately is held to this standard where if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says something, he complies. So for Moshe Rabbeinu, any level of non-compliance, by definition, is just a tremendous infraction. But what's fascinating amongst the Mefarshim is to dig a little bit deeper to try to understand, but Moshe, what was the real mistake? Like, obviously, I understand he hit the rock, he didn't speak to it. But on a deeper level, what is it that was unfolding over here? So I want to show you just a little bit of like a number of different Mefarshim. And again, part of the beauty of this is not a right, it's not a wrong. It's just fascinating to see how many different interpretations there are about the mistake of Moshe. So let's start with the Ramban. The Ramban in number 5 quotes actually from the Rambam. Now the Ramban himself happens to advance a number of different approaches. I'm just showing you one. The Ramban quotes from the Rambam, and the Rambam says like this. V'arav Rabbi Moshe, he's quoting her, that's the Rambam, source number 5. Savar bo svara v'amar ki Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom chet ohu shenata litzad haragzonos. How would you translate that phrase? Shenata litzad haragzonos? Anger. What happened over here? Moshe Rabbeinu got angry. That was the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu. And again, Yalkut Shimoni says it over here. And again, where does the Ramban get that Moshe Rabbeinu got angry? Like, where do you see that in the text? So the Ramban says at the end of number 5, Ba'amro shimu na hamorim. Listen, you rebellious ones. That was anger. You didn't need to say that. That didn't need to be done. Klal Yisrael was panicking. Got it. They didn't handle things in the right way. But sometimes you just have to appreciate where people are coming from, even if they're not handling things in the right way. But Moshe Rabbeinu lost his temper with them. He got angry. Shimun Hamorim. And because he got angry, look at the Yalkut Shimoni number 6. Moshe Rabbeinu, Lefi sheba lichlal ka'as, ba lichlal tos. Perhaps one of the most profound statements in Chazal. When you come to anger, you come to make mistakes. The tragedy of this story over here is, it's not that Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock. He hit the rock because he got angry. And when a person gets angry, they lose the ability to engage in dispassionate thought. And the moment you lose the ability to engage in dispassionate reasoning is the moment you open the door to all kinds of mistakes. I don't think we even have to take a poll here about who amongst us could relate to this, right? We've all said things and done things, in moments of incredible, intense emotion. And then afterwards, I'm like, how did I say that? Like, how did I do that? Because again, when a person ultimately allows themselves to fall into the grips of emotion, all kinds of negative things happen. It's one of the most interesting things. I think I mentioned this in last week's year, right? This is why Rabbi Soloveitchik writes that in Brisk, I think I mentioned this last week's year, in Brisk, so in the Brisker, methodology or ideology, I should say, emotion is considered to be a weakness, right? Emotion is a weakness, right? Intellect is king, and you have to allow intellect to rule. I think I mentioned this last week. Rabbi Soloveitchik highlighted that his father never told him, I love you. His father never said, I love you. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, I know my father loved me very much. But in Brisk, we didn't talk about emotions. In Brisk, we didn't talk about love. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't talk about any of that stuff because emotion is a weakness. Now, that's an extreme view. But on the other hand, there are people who are highly volatile, emotional beings, and they're a train wreck, right? Because if you're a highly emotional, volatile, then again, first of all, it's constant poles, and you're making mistakes right and left because you have to be able to sometimes see things in a dispassionate way. So of course, the most important, like most things in Yiddishkeit, as the Rambam says, derech hamamutza, the middle path. To live life without emotion is dry and lifeless. To live life of all emotion is a train wreck waiting to happen. So we have to be able to find this middle path where I'm able to engage in dispassionate reasoning, but at the same time pepper my life with strong doses of emotion when appropriate. So here that Ramban Yalkut Shimoni understand Moshe's mistake, he lost it. He lost it. And by the way, can you fault Moshe Rabbeinu for losing it? No. Remember again, already in last week's parsha, we begin to see a little bit of a crack in the veneer, right? What did Moshe Rabbeinu say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Remember again his wording? Hayisa omines hayonik. Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribbon Shalom, I'm not a nursing mother, right? He says, I don't understand what you want from me. Like, what do you want me to do? I give everything for these people, and it's never enough. It's never enough. Anything I do always falls short. Am I supposed to literally carry them like a nursing child? What's Chadosh Baruch Hu's answer to that? Yes, that was actually what was demanded of Moshe Rabbeinu, a different level of leadership. You have to care for them just as a nursing mother cares for her baby. But Moshe Rabbeinu over here, he just lost it. And again, this phrase, ba lichlal kas, ba lichlal tas. It's a good bumper sticker. If you allow yourself to fall prey to anger, you absolutely, unequivocally will make mistakes. This is a fascinating concept. This is not an anger shear. But in general, in the world of anger, if I were to ask you, anger, good thing or bad thing, what would you say? Good or bad? Right? It's like one of those things where, on one hand, kas, right? The Gemara calls kas like a fire. So is fire good or bad? Well, it depends how you use it, right? You could use it for cooking and it's incredible. You could use it for building and it's fantastic. And fire is also probably the most destructive force that exists in this world. See, the issue is, without kas, you know what happens without kas? Without kas, you fall into the clutches of moral relativity, right? Because then I don't get angry at anything, everything is good, everything is fine, everyone do what they want, and that's, so there has to be a certain level of kas, because kas, like for example, Pinchas had kas. Right now, don't try that at home either, but I'm saying, but that type of righteous indignation is incredibly important, because that fire of kas, that's what allows you to distinguish between right and wrong. But it's when kas gets in your way of proper decision making, that's when it's dangerous. So the Ramban Yalkut Shimoni understands over here the mistake of Moshe Rabbeinu, ba lichlal kas, ba lichlal tas. And in fact, if you look at number 7, the Maharal takes this a step further, and the Maharal says something truly beautiful. Because remember, you have to understand something. All the Torah goes out of its way to repeat the mistake of Moshe Rabbeinu multiple times, right? It's mentioned no less, I think, than 6 or 7 times throughout the entire Torah, which is a little bit crazy, because remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu committed one mistake, right? Most of us have committed more averos this morning, right, than Moshe Rabbeinu had committed in a lifetime. And yet the Torah chazers it over and over and over and over again. If it's doing that, it's not to beat Moshe Rabbeinu when he's down, but rather, again, it's because obviously there's something for us to learn from this event. There's something for us to glean from this. So there are life lessons here. So this tremendous lesson that even Moshe Rabbeinu, when he allows himself to fall into the clutches of anger, makes mistakes. And if that's true for Moshe Rabbeinu, then how careful we have to be with our temper as well. It's interesting, by the way, the Rambam in Hilchos Deos, I should actually put this on the sheet. The Rambam discusses the midah of kas, and he says that kas, anger, is one of the most destructive character traits. Right? And therefore, again, he says, Rambam says, a person really should not have any level of kas. There's interesting kas and kanos. Kanos is like zealotry, which could be positive kas. The Rambam says something amazing. The Rambam says, so what happens if a person has a problem with kas? A person has a short fuse. The person has a bad temper. So what should you do about that? How do you fix that? What does the Rambam say? Anyone know? Venture a guess. What does the Rambam say? I'm sorry? Become a butcher, right? You could channel it. Absolutely, you could channel it. Good. What else? The Rambam says something amazing. Get ready for this. Maimonidean pearl. My wife has heard my shiurim already a number of times, right? Hey, so the Rambam says a tremendous idea. The Rambam says, stop getting angry. That's the Maimonidean pearl of wisdom for dealing with the short fuse. Stop getting angry. I could have been the Rambam. I don't know. I could have come up with that. But understand the profundity of it. The profundity of the Rambam is you control how you feel. You control how you act. If you want to get angry, that is a choice. See, when it comes to emotion, we may not control how we feel, like reflexively. Like, in other words, someone does something. So that might engender a reflexive feeling, right? So right now, but what you choose to do with that initial feeling, do you choose to perpetuate that feeling? Do you choose to act on that feeling? That is a choice. And therefore the Rambam says, if I have a short fuse, I have a bad temper, change it. Change it. It's such an incredible idea. And by the way, interestingly enough, how many more times in the Chumash does Moshe Rabbeinu get angry? How many more times? At least as far as the text records, 0. Moshe Rabbeinu makes a mistake, but it would appear that Moshe Rabbeinu also understood the gravity of this mistake, and like the Rambam says, chooses to act differently. The Maharal in number 7 says something so beautiful. The Maharal says, Shimon HaMorim, I put more on the sheet than what we're going to cover, but I just wanted to show you this piece because I think it's really beautiful. He says, Shimon HaMorim, V'chin shehiku, I'm in the right-hand column, V'chin shehiku elasela, ein ze Amuna. So it's very interesting. The Maharal says the act of striking the rock, by definition, is a lack of Amuna. Now, what does that mean? He says, Ki Amuna hu misha boteach bo yisbarach, ein lo bo rak simcha. I'll translate the words and you'll see how profound this is. If a person has Amuna engenders a feeling of simcha. Shezeh inyan Amuna. Shemamin bo boteach bo v'mhabitachon hasimcha avali makas ein kan emuna. I think what the Maharal is saying is like this. The Maharal is using the word simcha, but really the way he's understanding simcha is in a different way. What is true emuna? If you think about this, if a person has emuna, what does that engender? How does that make you feel if you have true emuna? I'm sorry? Shalom, tranquility. Real Amuna engenders tranquility. And we see this, right, in our own lives, right? When I am in a good place with my Amuna, again, even when big stuff comes my way, I take a deep breath. I got this. Amuna brings a sense of tranquility. So the Maharal says over here, Moshe, you have to understand what the avoda was in this moment, right? Let's go back. Let's retrace the steps. Miriam dies. Now, the death of Miriam in and of itself is traumatic, right? Because Miriam was one of the leaders of Klal Yisrael. So again, her death is so trauma right there. Then with her death, no water. Traumatic again. So there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of raw emotions, there's a lot of stuff going on over here. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, you have a golden opportunity over here to show people that the power of Amuna is that it gives you a sense of life tranquility. It gives you a calmness. Now again, I want to be clear. Calmness doesn't mean that everything is going to turn out the way that you want. This is very important, right? People misunderstand Amuna. And people think that Amuna means believing that everything is going to turn out just perfectly. Do you know what we call that? When you say everything's going to just turn out perfectly, you know what they call that? That's called a fairy tale. That's called a fairy tale, right? Because every fairy tale always ends in the same way, which is, and everyone lived happily ever after. Judaism does not believe in fairy tales. In fact, amazingly enough, if you look at the end of almost every single one of our major Sifrei Tanakh, not one of them ends with everyone lived happily ever after, right? The Chumash ends, how does the Chumash end? What's the end of the Chumash? Ends of the Chumash. Moshe Rabbeinu dies, steps away from Eretz Yisrael, steps away, he dies. To me, the greatest example of this is Megillas Esther, right? So again, we finish Megillas Esther, everyone's so happy, Shoshanas Yaakov Salav V'Samecha. And you think about it, all right, we're all celebrating. There's one person who most probably was pretty miserable, and that was Esther HaMelech. Locked in a marriage she did not want to be in, locked in a life she did not want to be in. Well, it's like crazy. We have this whole yontiv, and meanwhile the heroine of the story, Esther obviously was a tremendous balas Amuna also, but we're all celebrating everything is perfect because Klal Yisrael was saved. But meanwhile, again, for the architect of salvation, for the heroine of the story, her life, at least from an outside perspective, is an absolute disaster. Is an absolute disaster, a divinely orchestrated disaster, but a disaster nevertheless. Amuna doesn't mean that everything is going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. What Amuna says is, some way, somehow, everything's going to be okay. What does okay mean? Okay means it's a part of a bigger plan of which I am a part of. And I recognize, and all of us know this because as we get older, we live this. Life is not going to go according to my plan. Now, many times in life, life is even better than my plan. But a lot of times in life is much more difficult than the plan that I had for myself. And what Amuna says is, even though my life is not following the plan I had for myself, it is following the plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for me. I am in the hands of the great universal choreographer. I'm in the hands of my Father. I'm in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's got this. I don't know what's flying, but he's got this. That's Amuna. And when you have that Amuna, you're able, no matter how painful things are, to take a deep breath and to say, you know what? Somehow, some way, it's going to be all right. The Maral says, Moshe Rabbeinu, that was what you were supposed to model for Klal Yisrael. Isn't this incredible? Klal Yisrael is falling apart. They lost Miriam. They lost their water. Moshe, what were you supposed to do? You were supposed to roll in, cool, calm, and collected. And say, Klal Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu's got this. You need water in the desert for 3.5 million people? What else do you need? Right? What else? Come on, give me something difficult. Right? But instead, what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He lost it. He lost it. By the way, we could relate to this sometimes as parents, right? One of the most incredible teachable moments that we have for our children is in stressful situations. I learned this a little bit early on after failing miserably a couple of times. For me, I can deal with a lot of things. I don't know why this is. For me, I can't deal with traffic. I can't deal with traffic. And as being the only member of both of our families that live outside of the New York, New Jersey area, so we encounter traffic very often. And eschatani maskir, I don't do well with it. Illness, deal with other stuff. Give me any life challenge, I could pretty much handle it. I don't know what it is. It sounds infantile. Traffic, mamish, I'm reduced to a pouting 2-year-old. Right? Questioning the entire meaning of existence. What are we doing here? How can HaKadosh Baruch Hu let this happen? All this kind of stuff. And I realized when I was little, when I have these type of adult meltdowns, my children hear it. and they see it. And I'm conveying to them the most ridiculous, inappropriate chinuch. Because as a parent, the biggest thing you convey to your children is how to deal with stress and how to deal with adversity and how to deal with difficulty. How do you act when you walk in the house after that difficult day? How do you interact with them when you are all upset and bent out of shape about a whole variety of different things? In those moments, if I'm able to keep it together and model a sense of tranquility, because I'm a Yid, I'm a Jew, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's got this, that's the most incredible chinuch. And on a national level, the Maharal says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Moshe, that's what I needed from you in this moment. Everyone is falling apart. Everyone is falling apart. Moshe, your job is to be collected. Your job is to be intact. Your job is to be calm and to come in and to show the people the power of Amuna is that it steadies you. The power of Amuna is that it anchors you. The power of Amuna is that it gives you a sense of inner tranquility. But instead, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do? What did he do? He lost it. Like the Ramban, like the Al Kuchmoni said, he got angry. He got angry. He did the same thing they did. Klal Yisrael lost it because they didn't have water. Moshe Rabbeinu lost it because Klal Yisrael lost it that they didn't have water. So now everybody's behaving in the same lack of Amuna way. And that's why, interestingly enough, even if you look at the way that Hashem rebukes Moshe Rabbeinu, right? If you go back just to source number 4 for just a moment, look at the Lashon over here, because the Lashon is always so bothersome. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Ve'larod, Ya'an lo ha'emantem bi. You know, those words seem very unfair. You're saying Moshe Rabbeinu didn't believe in you? Ya'an lo ha'emantem bi? You didn't, because you didn't believe in me, lahakdishini le'inei Yisrael. You did not believe in me to sanctify me for Klal Yisrael. How can you accuse Moshe Rabbeinu of not? You want to accuse him of getting angry, fine. But to say he didn't believe in you, but now it makes sense. You had a golden opportunity to teach the Klal what Amuna does. Amuna doesn't mean that everything is going to go like you want. Amuna doesn't mean, we know this because sometimes we're locked in a little bit of an infantile theology that says, if you daven enough, you'll get everything you want. And if you daven enough, everything's going to go. That's not the way it works. Because often, the things I want out of life, what I want from me, is not the right thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a different plan. Amuna doesn't give you what you want. Amuna steadies you. So that as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan for you unfolds, you are a whole, intact, functional, and together human being. Amuna steadies us. And in this moment of crisis, Moshe, you could have modeled that for them. But instead, Moshe Rabbeinu, you fell apart. Now, again, we're not standing in judgment of Moshe Rabbeinu. This was already, again, a couple of years of constant, unending stress, right? Even Moshe Rabbeinu has his breaking points. He's still a human being. He's still a person, a great man. And that, by the way, that's part of the Musar here also. We all have breaking points. We all have breaking points, right? No matter how good we are at keeping things together, all of us have that thing, that person, that event, that statement, that word that just like sends us over the cliff. It's the nature of the human condition. The goal is, after I go over the cliff, to get myself back on track. Power of Amuna is that it steadies us. And again, that's also the Musar Haskell. So you see 2 lessons over here. Number 1, like the destructive nature of anger, and therefore we really have to be careful to avoid anger. And if I do have a short fuse, the Rambam says, work on that. Lesson number 2, the power of Amuna is not that it gives you what you want. The power of Amuna is that it steadies you. And it gives you a sense of inner tranquility, so that no matter what does happen to you in life, you got this. You got this. You're not going to be derailed, and you'll be able to be solid and steadied, so you see the actualization of the Ribono Shel Olam's plan. A different approach. Number 8. So here again, I'm just pointing out that these are just like different approaches to understand what's happening over here, right? So power of anger, power of Amuna. Bless you. Rabbi Yitzchak says something very beautiful. Rabbi Yitzchak highlights over here something really profound. He says, if you take a look, just in the beginning of source number 8, we're not going to do all of this, but just to paint the picture. He says in 8 Aleph, V'hinei yesh shnei bechinos b'mochiach. So the Rebbe understands this over here, that the power of this story is how to rebuke people. Now, there's a mitzvah, probably the hardest mitzvah in the Torah, is hocheach tocheach hasamisecha. To rebuke someone, I see someone doing something wrong, it is my obligation to rebuke them. Now, some people take this very seriously, right? And take every opportunity to mamish give the tochacha, to give the musar, right? They're experts at it. It is a very fine art. And chances are most of us probably should not be doing it, because in order to do it, you have to approach it with a heart filled with love and a sincere desire to want the other to be better and to do better. It can't be with any type of malice, any type of negativity. So the Rebbe says, in general, there are two different ways in which a person can give tochacha. Two different ways in which a person can give rebuke. The Rebbe says, Echad, shemochiach bidvarim tovim. One is to go ahead and build the person up. Right? To go ahead and highlight, you're so great, you're so wonderful, you're so fantastic. And then ultimately, again, by building the person up, either the person understands on their own, or then you're able to add in, and that's why this behavior is so beneath you. You're better than this. You're greater than this. So the rebuke comes, but the rebuke comes from building the individual up and highlighting their goodkeit, not chas v'shalom, again, highlighting their negativity. And the Rebbe says, there's another approach. If you skip down a little bit, he says, V'yesh shemochiach. I'm in 8 paragraph aleph, 3 lines up before the paragraph ends, middle of the line. V'yesh shemochiach has Yisrael, b'dvarim kashim, u'dvarim biyushim. And there are other ways in which you could rebuke someone with intensity, right? Intense words, harsh words, where you put the person into their place, again, with almost like a verbal shock and awe, going ahead and highlighting to a person what they've done wrong, their shortcomings, and where they failed. So, and again, these are two different models. And by the way, from a leadership perspective, a leader may have to employ different models at different times. See, here's what's incredible. So, there's one question we have not tackled this entire time, which is, remember again, there were 3 parts to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's instruction to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? What was part 1? Part 1, right? Take the staff. Part 2, gather the people. Part 3, speak to the rock. Out of all of those 3 parts, which one doesn't make sense? Take the staff. Why is it? It almost seems like it's a setup, right? Hashem tells Moshe to take the staff, but why does he have to take the staff if he has to speak to the rock? Leave the staff behind. It was Chash Baruch who told him to take the staff. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says something absolutely amazing. He says, at that moment when Moshe Rabbeinu was standing by the rock with the staff, what does a staff represent? A staff is used to hit. Remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu brought forth water from the rock twice. The first time he was commanded to hit the rock. So the staff, the Rebbe says, represents hitting, force. The staff represents tochacha, rebuke, by beating people down. That you just lay them out. I can't believe you did this. This is horrible. This is ridiculous, unforgivable. That's the staff. I want you to hold the staff in your hand. And I want Klal Yisrael to see that you're not using it. Because now, what you're going to show Klal Yisrael is, as disappointed as I am, I being Hashem, I being Moshe Rabbeinu, in your behavior, I'm not going to beat you down. Instead, I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to speak to the rock. I'll speak to the rock. There's a beautiful, beautiful idea Rabbi Levi Yitzchak brings down by Yaakov and Esav. Right? The pasuk says, very also strange dynamic, right? Yaakov and Esav, parents, Yitzchak and Rivka. So the Torah tells us that each parent loved a different child, which is a strange dynamic by itself, right? So that Yitzchak loved Esav, kitzayid b'fiv. Kitzayid b'fiv. So what does kitzayid b'fiv literally mean? Sounds like because Esav was a hunter, and he brought Yitzchak meat every single day to eat. But Rivka had versus Yaakov. Rivka loved Yaakov. Okay. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Rabbi again asks on that pasuk, he says, I don't understand. Because Esav fed Yaakov, that's why Esav is the favorite child? And again, Rashi understands that Esav deceived Yitzchak. And Yitzchak thought that his son was pious. So Levi says it's not true. Yitzchak knew who his son was. He knew exactly who his son was. He knew what his son's struggles were. So why did he love him? Why did he love him? Kitzayid, because he saw in Esav that there was so much trapped Kiddusha. Tzayid is like trapped. He saw in Esav that there was so much good. So how do you get the good out of an Esav? And what's the answer? Befiv, with kind words. You don't get an Esav to change by telling him how terrible he is. You get an Esav to change by telling him how much you love him and all the good that you see inside of him. That's how you get an Esav to change. Bless you. Yitzchak Avinu understood that at the end of the day, he knew who his son was. He knew his son was up to no good, but he also saw the good inside of him, Kitzayid. And if I could just continue to smother him with love and with good words and with positive encouragement and reinforcement, somehow, some way, he'll come around. By the way, did it work? Did it work? It did. It did. Esav gets a bad rap, and I'll tell you how we know it did work. When Yitzchak Avinu dies, the pasuk says, "Vayikberu oso Esav Yaakov banav." It says that his son's buried, and Rashi says, "Mikan sha'asa Esav tshuva." Esav became a Baal tshuva. Now, did he become a permanent Baal tshuva? I don't know. But the point over here is, he did tshuva. What it means, how it manifests, I don't know. But he did tshuva, which means the strategy works. Smother people with love. Smother people with kindness. Smother them with acceptance. And some way, somehow, at some point, they will come around. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, Moshe, I know you're angry at them. I know you're angry at them. I know you're upset at them. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the staff, because I know what you want to do more than anything is you want to give it to them. You want to let them have it. You want to unleash verbally on them. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to hold the staff in your hand and not use it. And not use it. And I want Klal Yisrael to see that you're holding the staff and you're not using it. Instead, what do I want you to do? V'dibartem el hasela. Use your words. Tell them you love them. Tell them you love them. Tell them they're great. And tell them they're so great, and that's why you can't believe that they are doing this right now. That they're the best and most incredible and holy nation to ever walk on the face of the earth. That they don't even understand what their power is, what their destiny is, what their abilities are. Build them up with your words. Don't knock them down with brute verbal force. That's why Moshe was ordered to take the staff. But ultimately, what happens? Well, again, a lot of these ideas are kind of interconnected. Moshe Rabbeinu was so consumed by anger that he couldn't stop. So he doesn't use his words. He doesn't use his words, and ultimately he uses the staff. So what he does is he gives the tochach, he gives the rebuke, but he gives the rebuke by beating them down. Shivun hamorim, listen, you rebellious ones, you ingrates. He beats them down. They get the water, because you could accomplish a lot with a verbal beatdown as well. You could accomplish a lot, but the long-term accomplishment is stymied and stunted. So this, says Rabbi Yitzchak, this was the mistake here. And what an incredible model for us in our own lives, because the truth is, all of us contend with difficult relationships, right? All of us have difficult people in our lives. Many of us have multiple difficult people in our lives. Some of us contend with this with our children, some of us contend with our parents, with our siblings, in a marriage, with friends. And the question is, how do you want to deal with the difficult people in your life? If you come from the perspective that people at their core are good, and when they do bad things or negative things, it's often because of some unresolved pain inside of them, right? Because we know this. Normal, happy, healthy people act in normal, happy, healthy ways. And if someone is not acting that way, chances are there's something in a tremendous state of disrepair inside of them. So how do you want to deal with it? With the stick or with your words? Both are effective. One has immediate results, right? The stick will give you immediate results right now. It'll get water out of the rock right now. But it doesn't have the long-term desired effect. But words, building up someone, figuring out a way to give that tochacha, but not through pushing a person down, through picking them up, that's ultimately, again, what yields the long-term results in our relationships. And that's what Hashem was asking Moshe to do. Bring your staff, but don't use it. show the people that life is filled with a choice between your words and the stick. Both are effective, but what do you want to use in the cultivation of your life relationships? And lastly, then we'll bring everything together, is a beautiful Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says so beautifully. Amr Rabbi Shimon Levi. Shimon Levi says as follows: Lo asi Yisrael se'ega el litem pischon pele b'alei tshuva. So Rabbi Shimon Levi says something very interesting here, and he says, really, Klal Yisrael shouldn't have committed the sin of the golden calf. Okay, so why did they do it? Only to give an opening for b'alei tshuva, for people to do tshuva. Similarly, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shlomo Yochai, Lo David Roy La'osa Ma'isa. Really, David HaMelech should not have committed the sin with Bathsheba. It shouldn't have happened. So why did it happen? Why did it happen? Ultimately, again, Liton Pesach LeBalei Tshuva. Ultimately, to give an excuse for Balei Tshuva. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? There's certain, now, David HaMelech is responsible for his actions. Allah is responsible for their actions. But what's fascinating to see, the Gemara is highlighting, is that sometimes great people do really bad things. And it almost to a certain degree sometimes feels like it's a setup, right? I'll give you an example of this. Chet Egel, sin of the golden calf, right? The sin of the golden calf could have been totally avoided in one simple. How could it have been avoided? How could it have been avoided? Moshe could have done the day before, or aren't good, or simple. Moshe, Chevra, sending you a calendar invite, right? Again, here's when I'm going to be back between the hours of so and so and so and so, right? Just eliminate the ambiguity, right? There's whole date ambiguity. Did the count start from the day that Moshe Rabbeinu went up, or did it start the next day? Just tell them. Just tell them. Just tell them. Right? That's all it required. It was a little bit of a setup. David HaMelech, the Gemara records an incredible conversation. David HaMelech says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I have effectively conquered my Yetzer Hara. David HaMelech says, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, you haven't. David says, I promise I have. I promise I have. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, you haven't. David HaMelech says, Bechanuni, test me. Test me. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no. David HaMelech says, test me, I'm ready for it. Kadosh Baruch Hu finally relents. What happens? That night, David HaMelech can't sleep. He's on his rooftop. He sees a bird flying. He shoots a bird at an arrow. An arrow at the bird. Now, that's weird. David HaMelech wasn't one of these kids like with magnifying glasses by insects, like that's like, he wasn't shooting arrows at birds, okay, but he shot an arrow at a bird. What happened with the arrow? It pierced a sheet. Behind the sheet was a woman named Bathsheba who was bathing on her rooftop. So a whole confluence of events, David HaMelech seized by desire, and ultimately again, sins with Bathsheba. It feels like a setup. The whole thing feels like, and to a certain degree, it was a setup. That sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu places great people in very difficult circumstances. Now obviously, people have the chiyur. David HaMelech did not have to do what he did. And Klal Yisrael did not have to do what they did by the Egel. But it is a little bit of a setup. And what's the point of the setup? To show us that even great people make terrible mistakes. But what's the most incredible part? What makes great people great? What makes great people, this is the problem, I think, with like a lot of like contemporary, like Gedolim biographies, like biographies are great, right? Everything is like whitewashed, right? In other words, that when you read these biographies, it's incredible. And how do you feel when you close the book? You're like, these people are totally unrelatable. They're absolutely unrelatable. Like I can't relate to this at all because they're absolutely perfect. I remember, I don't remember if I mentioned this in this year or not. A couple of years ago, we took some of the boys from YMC, took to the Rosh Yeshiva, to Aaron Feldman, and he did like a question answer with them. And Rosh Yeshiva, this was great. It was worth it just for this. Rosh Yeshiva said, boys, what do you think I was doing during high school? So they said, what do you think I was doing during high school? So no one wants to answer, whatever. He says, let me tell you what I was doing in high school. I was playing basketball and pranks. That's what he said. Basketball and pranks, right? And the boys, like, you can see, like, they were like, huh? Like, I didn't, like, I thanked Rashiv after. I said, like, whatever Torah you could have given them, they would have forgotten 3 seconds later, right? I guarantee you that they will never forget, because suddenly, a Gadol B'Yisrael just became a semi-relatable human being. Sometimes what the Kadosh Baruch Hu does is that he puts great people in a circumstance where they're most probably going to fail. Why? Because he needs us to see that failure. He needs us to see that failure. Number one, for me to learn that great people fail, but to also allow me to see what makes great people great. What makes great people great is not that they don't fail. Great people fail also. What makes great people great is what they do in the aftermath of failure. What do in the aftermath? And what do great people do in the aftermath of failure? They get back up, they dust themselves off, and they move themselves forward. What does David HaMelech do in the aftermath of the episode of Bathsheba? And David HaMelech lost a lot as a result of that episode. David HaMelech, again, the first baby he had with Bathsheba died. David HaMelech had illness, suffered personal illness, and the rebellion of Avshalom were all the result of the events of Bathsheba. David suffered a lot, besides the fact that most of the kingdom turned on him as a result of that particular episode. Klal Yisrael, Cheta Egel, son of the golden calf. The Gemara says, there's not one misfortune that befalls Klal Yisrael to this very day that is not somehow rooted in retribution for the sin of the golden calf. But what did David HaMelech do after confronted by the enormity of his actions? What did he do? He owned it, Chatasi Elokim, and he moved forward. What does Klal Yisrael do in the aftermath of the sin of the golden calf? We continue to march towards Eretz Yisrael. And incredibly enough, Moshe Rabbeinu is also a shtickle setup over here, right? Why is it a setup? Why are you telling him to take the staff? Why are you telling him to take the staff? Right? Because we know what's going to happen. Klal Yisrael is clamoring in his ear, right? We can be the greatest group of nudniks, right? We really can. That's our power, and that's it's like our superpower, and it's also like our super weakness. Klal Yisrael, we can be meshuga. And especially if we don't like something, the way we could turn on leaders, no one could do it like us. So Moshe Rabbeinu was surrounded by millions of people who literally again just want to go back to Egypt. He has a staff in his hand. What do you think he's going to do? Of course he's going to hit rock. He's a human being. It was kind of a setup. It was a David HaMelech moment. It was a Chita Egel moment. But why? Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to see Klal Yisrael. Do you want to see what makes Moshe Rabbeinu? I didn't put it on the sheet, but do you know what the next section in the Torah is after this? You know what the next section is? Moshe Rabbeinu says, to Sichon, we're coming through. Let us pass through. We don't want to do anything right. We don't want war. We need to go to Eretz Yisrael. In the aftermath of this episode of Mei Meriva, Moshe Rabbeinu gets back up, dusts himself off, and continues to lead Klal Yisrael. That's the message. We all encounter tremendous life failure. We all do. We all do. On any given day, we're failing at something. And at different intervals in life, there are dramatic life failures. Too often, we're so tempted in the aftermath of failure just to give up, just to give in, just to say, woe is me, it didn't go as I planned. Look what I did. Okay, so you could wallow in it, you could lament it, you could feel sorry for yourself, or you could be a David HaMelech, you could be a Moshe Rabbeinu, you could be a Klal Yisrael who also made their own traumatic and dramatic life-altering mistakes. Understand, David HaMelech made a mistake that changed his life. Moshe Rabbeinu made a mistake that changed his life. Klal Yisrael made a mistake that changed his life. Adam and Chava made a mistake, but we could keep going, right? Every great person made big mistakes that changed lives. You know that Ramban says that Sarah Imenu mistreated Hagar? She mistreated Hagar. And you know what Ramban says? As a result of Sarah's mistreatment of Hagar, Yishmael hates us to this day. The Ramban says it was Sarah Imenu's mistreatment of Hagar that has led to the contemporary animosity between Sarah's children and Hagar's children. That's a doozy. Everyone makes big life-changing mistakes. The difference is great people pull themselves together, dust themselves off, don't wallow in it, and just move forward. Moshe Rabbeinu again changed his life in a moment, right? In a moment of hitting a rock instead of speaking to a rock. Moshe Rabbeinu changed his entire future. What are you going to do now, Moshe? I'm going to move forward. I have a job to do, and I'm not going to let anything distract me from that job. So if we bring this all together, it turns out that there are many, many incredible life lessons to be learned from this dramatic and traumatic moment. Lesson number one, the power of anger, the destructive power of anger, and how we have to understand how to go ahead and channel that. And if we do have an issue with anger, an issue with temper, like the Ramban says, stop it. Stop it. That is the Maimonidean piece of advice. You get angry too often, too intensely, stop it. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. What's the answer? It is that easy. It is that easy. It's a choice. How you feel is a choice. How you act is a choice. Lesson one. Lesson two. The power of Amuna is Amuna doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to go the way that you want. Amuna doesn't mean everything is going to unfold the way that you want it to. But what Amuna does mean is, Amuna is a steadying presence or a steadying force. So when you have Amuna, you could deal with pretty much anything and everything that comes your way, and you will not get derailed. Amuna gives a sense of simcha. Simcha, according to the Maral, means a sense of inner shalom, a sense of tranquility. The mistake of Moshe Rabbeinu was that you could have modeled that ultimately again for Klal Yisrael. That Amuna gave you tranquility, but instead you fell into the same hole, the same abyss of anger that they fell into. In terms of dealing with difficult people, there are two different ways in which we can give tochacha. Number one, we could beat people down with a stick, or we can lift them up with our words. Yitzchak Avinu showed that you could build people up even in Esav with words, and you could get them to change. Because Baruch Hu wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to hold the staff and not to use it to show Klal Yisrael. I could beat you down, but I'm not going to. I'm going to lift you up with my words. I'm going to use my words to unlock your kedusha. I'm going to reinforce your greatness, modeling for us how we have to deal with difficult people, sometimes within our own families, within our own lives as well. Is there a time for the stick? There is. Even Moshe Rabbeinu had to use the stick to get the water from the rock. But more often than not, you could accomplish so much more with your words. You could accomplish so much more with love. You could accomplish so much more with positive encouragement than you can with the stick. And last lesson, this whole episode is to teach us a very simple lesson, that at the end of the day, even great people make mistakes. And sometimes the greater the person, the more intense and the more overwhelming and the more life-altering the mistake is. But what makes great people great is not that they avoid mistakes. Well, I'm sure they do avoid many mistakes. What makes them great is not the avoidance of mistakes. What makes them great is how they deal with the aftermath of their mistakes. Immediately following this dramatic and traumatic mistake of Moshe Rabbeinu, what does he do? He gets up, dusts himself off, and continues forward, modeling for us the same behaviors as well. We all make traumatic life mistakes, and some of us have made mistakes that forever change the trajectory of our lives. And so often, I can't stop thinking about the mistake. I can't stop perseverating over the mistake. I can't stop wallowing in it. But what does that get you? It doesn't get you anything. But if you accept that sometimes in life there are things you can't go back on, sometimes in life there are things that just can't be undone. I got it. This is my new reality. But let me own it. Let me embrace it. Let me pick myself up, gather myself together, and figure out the best path forward. It's what David did. It's what Adam did. It's what Sarah did. It's what Klal Yisrael did in the aftermath of Chet Egel. It's what Moshe Rabbeinu did, and Emir Hashem, it should be the same thing that we should have the koach to do as well. All right, let's stop over here for today. There's no shir for the next couple of weeks. If you're not on the WhatsApp chat, this is the QR code to get on it. So any scheduling updates, we hope to start up again in a couple of weeks from now, Emir Hashem. So I'll post the schedule on here, and any changes, as many of you already saw this morning, and changes will be put on that WhatsApp chat as well. Have a wonderful day.